And maybe for folks out there, I may just ask this a little bit earlier, but maybe Brian, if you want to jump in on this, for folks who don't know what SEIU is, do you want to explain what that is and maybe how they found themselves in a position to seemingly take this win, as Alvaro explains it?
Sure. Service Employees International Union, as SEIU, it's one of the largest unions in the country, 2 million workers. The two locals that have been organizing in the rideshare industry are 721 and 1021. They both represent public sector workers in the LA area, Southern California, and then in the Bay Area as well. And you know, throughout SEIU, I mean, there's different industries that different locals cover. There's healthcare, there's building services, there's public workers. Um, I think one of the things that's been really compelling about my time in working with RDU is that there is such a commitment to having drivers' voices heard as drivers' voices, because it is such a unique job, right? There's no way to understand the ways that the algorithm kind of manages people. There's no way to understand the struggles that people have unless you've done it yourself, right? And for people in sort of high powered spaces within these very large unions, with a lot of resources at their disposal and a lot of political capital, to assume that they can speak for drivers while really winning away their rights. And I think that this is really the biggest problem, is that Jane McAlevey, who was a scholar and organizer, wrote a great book that called "No Shortcuts," exactly as Alvaro said. That like the way that unions that have grown over the last number of decades have done so is by taking those shortcuts and trying to make arrangements with employers, because the process of organizing has become too difficult, as the NLRB has been defanged, and the National Labor Relations Board, and that there's corporations have taken so much power in clamping down on organizing, that these other approaches have been put in place. But the downside of that has been that unions have really been disempowered and don't have a lot of support from the ground up. This is taking things, I think, one step further, where we're not just saying that workers, employees are going to have kind of like staff-led unions, and like you'll be able to negotiate a contract and have some semblance of benefits and rights and stuff. What we're saying now is we're going back before there were even legal unions under the National Labor Relations Act. The Wagner Act in the 1930s banned company unions. This was a very common practice in the 1920s, where bosses formed organizations for workers to kind of give input, and to have some sense that they had a say in the way that their jobs were shaped, but in fact had no real power. And that was a move to stop the labor movement itself. Um, what Uber and Lyft have done in misclassifying workers is saying, hey, we don't fall under the National Labor Relations Act. We can actually have company unions. And they've pursued that approach in New York City with the Independent Drivers Guild, which is run by the International Association of Machinists. And they've also done it in other countries. There's a union like that in Australia. There's a union like that in the UK. And they found willing partners in sort of the mainstream labor movement, in order to take on that role to kind of build those organizations. So, what we're seeing now in California, um, there are, I think, real concerns that without real driver say, with these kinds of deals being negotiated behind closed doors, that this could be a door opening towards company unionism here in California. Um, the bill does ban company unions, but it defines them very loosely, and it does allow the companies to give financial support to particular activities for the unions, but there's no mechanism to ensure that that money is being spent in any sort of discrete way. So without that oversight, and knowing that there's been years and years of kind of backdoor channeling between Uber, Lyft, and SEIU, a lot of people, I think, have reason to be concerned.
But before we bring Alvaro back in here, I want to ask one follow up question because there may be folks listening out there who say like, what's wrong with the company union? I got a family member who works at Google and they get a ping pong table and a free seat. These companies are great. What's your critique of company unions? And I know it's a big question, so you can just kind of give some highlights of that if you want.
Well, if you have a company union, how do you ever in that space have people with the right to actually form their own union and have their own organization, right? You know, companies are only going to allow as much as they're going to allow, and if they're in charge of, the process of how workers decide what they want their workplace to look like, and their organization, you're not going to have real democracy in the workplace. And what's particularly scary, I think, at this point is we're in a really anti-democratic moment. It's not an accident that we had company unions at a time when fascism was on the table in the United States in the 1920s going into the 1930s. And fascism is on the table again now. And so, for if workers don't have the ability to shape their own lives and to criticize their employers and to strike, um, you know, capital has a very, very strong arm. And that's really empowering for the bosses. So yeah, I think we really need to, looking at where our politics are right now, we need to, be very, very wary of surrendering those rights.